Hi, this is Elliot Cohen, and I want to welcome you back to Rough Magic, Shakespeare on Power. This begins the last three lectures of the course, a set of three lectures on the loss of power through errors or through deliberate decisions to renounce it. And today I want to discuss the most common way in which people lose power, and that's through arrogance and overreach. And our case is going to be Richard III. Richard has, at this point in the play, been extraordinary in his ability to manipulate people, to seduce the widow of somebody who he killed. He's ordered murders. He's deceived all kinds of people. He is finally on the crown. But as soon as he gets there, it's not enough. As soon as he has that office that he has been striving for so long, he is not content because he's not sure he's going to be able to keep power. That is part of the nature of power, I think, that you're always concerned that you might lose it. And he turns to Buckingham, who's been a pretty loyal supporter. And here's the thing to notice. Cousin, thou wast not wont to be so dull. Shall I be plain? I wish the bastards dead. These are his nephews. And I would have it suddenly performed. What sayest thou now? Speak suddenly. Be brief. So there are a couple of things about this. First, he's hinted that he wants his nephews killed. And Buckingham really doesn't want to engage that directly. In this scene, actually, there are a couple of times where Richard is not able to convey his meaning on the first go-round. But what we see very quickly is he is no longer the elusive, cunning Machiavellian Richard. He is very blunt about what he wants. He wants it done now. He is no longer a particularly effective manipulator of people. And he is imperious. What sayest thou now? Speak suddenly. Be brief. This is a very different Richard. It's a Richard who, because he is king, doesn't think he has to use the skills of what I referred to in a previous lectures, what Machiavelli refers to as the skills of the fox, as well as the lion. He is now on the throne, so he thinks he's a lion, and he sets aside a lot of that fox-like behavior that got him there. He now wants a different kind of advisor. Buckingham has reservations about killing his nephews. And Richard here, I think you can read the speech as saying, I don't want people who think too much. I don't want people who are circumspect. I want iron-witted fools and unrespective boys. I want people who are just going to do what I tell them to do. And it doesn't make a difference what their previous record is. Hath he so long held out with me, untired, and stops he now for breath? Well, be it so. So Richard is convinced, like a lot of powerful people, that he doesn't need any more help now that he's on the crown, beyond his own understanding of the situation. He is looking for followers. He's looking for people who are going to execute his orders, in this case, literally. He doesn't need counselors. He doesn't need people who are going to be thoughtful agents of his will. And then something else happens. He realizes he needs to do more and more. Now, Macbeth, of course, anticipated this. Macbeth, when he kills Duncan, he knows he's going to get himself deeper in, although he doesn't know how much. Richard, because of the arrogance that has hit him now that he's finally king, is about to do something even more breathtaking. He's going to marry his niece. He knows that that's really problematic. It means he's got to kill his current wife, which he tries to have done. But he said, I am in so far in blood that sin will pluck on sin. Tear-falling pity dwells not in this eye. He prides himself on not having any kind of human sympathy whatsoever. Well, the issue isn't simply whether he's a compassionate figure or not. We already know that. It's whether he is reaching too far. And the problem, of course, is that he thinks his kingdom stands on brittle glass. So he is in that state of anxiety that powerful people are sometimes in. They've gotten there. This is the thing that they've really wanted their whole lives, perhaps. They're at the very top, and now they find it very precarious. And so they do things that maybe are not particularly wise. And then there's another element that goes on here. Buckingham is asking for Richard to deliver on the promises that were made to him, and Richard doesn't indulge him, and he goes through this play. Now, this scene can be played in a very humorous way. It frequently gets laughs out of the audience, but he is deliberately messing around with Buckingham, and he just says, "I'm not in the giving vein today." Well, I think we saw with Henry V when he set up the trap for the conspirators. Powerful people sometimes like to be manipulators. They like to play with their subordinates. They like the cat and mouse game. That cat and mouse game, Henry V's cat and mouse game, though, was very effective. The people he played with, he killed. And it was done in such a way as to inspire others, not to put fear into them. Here, what he's doing is his malicious sense of humor is getting him into trouble, because Buckingham now turns on him, and although Buckingham himself will not escape, this is really the point at which Richard's kingdom begins to unravel. People now see through him, and that's really the thing, that Richard, who had been able to wear these masks and prided himself on being able to wear these masks, now finds himself revealed for who he is. Other people had seen it before. Queen Margaret, a dominant figure in Henry VI, who hates Richard, who is probably half mad, at the very beginning of the play gives this curse, and it's a wonderful speech. And she, like a lot of mad figures in Shakespeare and a lot of other plays, has a certain kind of insight. And that insight is there when thy friends suspect for traitors while thou livest, and take deep traitors for thy dearest friends. No sleep close up that deadly eye of thine, unless it be while some tormenting dream affrights thee with a hell of ugly devils. That's what happens, of course, to Richard. He can no longer trust anybody, if ever he could. He sees treason all around him. He begins behaving that way, and before you know it, the whole thing falls apart. Well, there's a question for you to think about. Does power necessarily make those who wield it arrogant? For the next time, I'd like you to read King Lear, Act 1, Scene 1. We'll begin talking about somebody deciding to relinquish power very deliberately. And the question is, why? Why does Lear decide to give up being king? That's not the question that we usually ask ourselves in that particular play. But I hope you'll see that it's actually quite an important one, not only for the play, but for how we think about Shakespeare on power. See you next time. Hi, this is Elliot Cohen, and I want to welcome you back to Rough Magic, Shakespeare on Power. We're in the last section of the course where we talk about how rulers lose power or give it up. And the case, we're going to be looking at two cases of powerful people relinquishing their power. One works out well, the other not so well. The one where it works out well, we'll talk about next time. That's Prospero in The Tempest. But in this lecture, what I would like to do is to discuss with you King Lear and why it is that Lear gives up his power. That's not the usual question that's asked, I have to say, about this play, because there's so much in it. But it is one that's worth thinking about. And so I'd like to begin at the very beginning, where Lear says that he's going to renounce his rule. Now, there are a couple things to notice about this. He describes his darker purpose, that maybe his more hidden objectives. He's divided his kingdom into three. That is very rarely a good idea. And I think particularly an audience in Shakespeare's time would have known that that's a problem, that you're setting yourself up for civil war and conflict. So there's already a question: is he making an intelligent decision? And then the other thing is, 'tis our fast intent. So he has already made this up. He's not taking counsel from anybody. He makes that clear later on in the scene. He's stopped consulting anybody. To shake all cares and business from our age. Cares of business. He's not he's thinking about the burden on himself. He's not really particularly thinking about his responsibility to his subjects or to anybody else. And in fact, he's carving up the kingdom, which is not a particularly responsible thing to do, conferring them on younger strengths while we unburdened crawl toward death. You can read Lear's purpose to some extent as reflecting a kind of senile obsession with death. And that is one way it's read. But I think you can read it in a different way, that he is tired of being king, but he's actually tired of the real work. He wants to have a good time. And of course, as you know, at the beginning of the play, he's traveling around from daughter to daughter with 100 knights who are kind of noisy and boisterous and who alienate people. And eventually the daughters strip him of those knights. But he clearly wants that. So he wants the boon companionship. He wants the authority of being a king. He just doesn't any longer want to do the hard work. And it's not just that he's going to divide up the kingdom. He wants his daughters to tell him, which of you shall we say doth love us most, that we our largest bounty may extend where nature doth with merit challenge. Now, of course, it's a terrible thing for a parent to say to a child, you should compete to tell me which of you loves me most. I think the critical thing here is Lear, first, he is ignorant of his own daughters. He's blind, and blindness is a theme that recurs throughout the play. He is treating his daughters like courtiers. This is what courtiers do. They say, you are the wisest, smartest, most wonderful person on earth, and I am completely and totally and utterly devoted to you. This is how he treats his family. And that should make us pause. And when one of his counselors, when his daughter says that I'm going to tell you that I love you because it's my duty to, but I'm not going to engage in this extravagant praise, he absolutely turns on her. And he invokes the sacred radiance of the sun, the mysteries of Hecate and the night. And he completely disclaims all paternal care. This is willful. It is completely unmeasured. He is invoking the sun and the moon, and so it's kind of blowing everything completely out of proportion, including who he is and what he's going to do. And that's, again, this can be portrayed as an indication of some sort of senile irritability. But I think it also is, once again, this is part of what monarchy has done to Lear. He has an inflated sense of who he is and what he merits. And if you cross him, then he is going to completely reject you. Or the case of the loyal Kent, who will come back, who tries to talk him out of this, absolutely turns on him and says, don't you dare come between our sentences and our power. There's an irony here. He's about to give up all of his power, right? Which nor our nature nor our place can bear. He's about to give up his place, and he threatens him with death. Again, this may be that he's simply losing his senses, but I prefer to think of it as somebody who is still dominated by the experience of monarchy and of power. And the central theme that I'd like to suggest here is that what Lear shows us is what happens when power and rule, detached to some extent from responsibility, completely eat away a personality. Now, Lear does recover his humanity. He begins recovering it in the first notable way, I think, in The Storm upon the Heath. Poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as these? Oh, I have taken too little care of this. I think there's a hint there that he now realizes that as a king, he didn't care about his poorest subjects. He hasn't thought that much about them. And he only gets there by really being brought down to the lowest possible level, to the point where he's literally naked to the storm. And, to the extent there's something that is positive about Lear, there are things that are positive about the story, is he recovers his humanity late. But as so often in Shakespeare, as indeed in life, he becomes wise too late. And I think this is really the point that I want to emphasize, and that is the way in which power can eat out or eat away somebody's humanity, and that in turn can lead them to fritter away their power or to throw it away, or to be irresponsible in how they use it, and sooner or later it comes back. That behavior comes back and can be destructive. And there are plenty of examples of that, I think, throughout history. A couple of times I've suggested that there's a reading of the play in which Lear is simply aging, and that's a perfectly plausible interpretation. We may wish to discuss that. Our next lecture is, astonishingly for me at least, the last in this course. We're going to talk about one of my favorite plays, The Tempest. We're going to talk about Prospero, who is decided at the end of the play to give up his magical powers, which means setting aside political rule. And we'll talk about that in our next and last lecture. This is Elliot Cohen, and I want to welcome you to the final lecture in Rough Magic, Shakespeare on Power. And indeed, in this lecture, we will be discussing the speech in which that phrase "rough magic" occurs, and that's Act 5, Scene 1 of The Tempest. So what I'd like to do is talk here about someone who relinquishes power voluntarily but responsibly. And that's a more difficult thing to do than one might think, but I believe one can say that Prospero does it. Now, at the beginning of the play, Prospero, who is the ruler of this island, which has different kinds of creatures on it, it has his daughter Miranda, who he's speaking to here. It has Caliban, his rather vicious servant, who he has to use some fairly brutal means to keep under control. He has the spirit Ariel, who does what Prospero wishes, but is sort of forgetful and flighty. And then there are the spirits of the island who show up. And what is about to happen is there is this storm that Prospero has conjured up, and all of his enemies have landed on the island, and he is about to bring everything to a conclusion. So he talks to his daughter about how he got here. And it's interesting here that he asks her to lend thy hand and pluck my magic garment from me. So lie there, my art. He can't speak to her while wearing his magic garments. That's already a sign of awareness, I believe. He can't speak to her from that distancing position of profound power and authority. He's going to speak to her, admittedly, from a certain kind of position of authority as a father, but he already understands that the human relationship of a father and daughter is very, very different from that of someone who rules, in this case, an island. He describes to her, this again, Act 1, Scene 1, how he ended up ruling this island. He had been the Duke of Milan. This wonderful phrase, me, poor man, my library was dukedom large enough. So he acknowledges that he was an irresponsible duke. To my state grew stranger, being transported and wrapped in secret studies. He was not doing his job as duke, and that enabled his brother to eventually displace him. Note, by the way, that the magic didn't save him. His magical powers didn't save him in any way from what then befell him. During the course of the play, he brings together Miranda and Ferdinand. They form a wonderful couple. He's reconciled with some, not all of the people who he's shipwrecked on the island. And then there is this moment. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, oped and let them forth by my so potent art. But this rough magic I here abjure, and when I've required some heavenly music, which even now I do, and then music begins to play, to work mine end upon their senses that this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. He's going to break his magic staff. He's going to bury his magic book. We have to ask ourselves, well, why does he want to do that? I mean, he's basically been able to do everything he's wanted to do. Presumably he can still perform magic even when he goes back to Milan, as it appears that he does. Why does he decide that he wants to let go this rough magic? And I think that's a wonderful phrase, because power is rough magic. Well, he explains this in the epilogue. Now, the epilogue is frequently described as Shakespeare's own farewell to the theater. That made a lot more sense when people really thought that The Tempest was the last play that he wrote. Scholars now seem to believe that actually it's not the last play that he wrote, that he either on his own or with the help of others continued to write. It's a wonderful, beautiful interpretation of the playwright as a magician, and there's a lot to be said for that. But I think we can understand it in his own terms as well. He's done everything he can do, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. He understands that the magic of power is not the same, is not completely of oneself. There's a distinction between the magic of power and one's own strength. And he wants to be released from that rough magic. It's not just that he releases Ariel, as, for example, he does. And Ariel either walks away or flies away, depending on how it's staged. He himself is being freed by giving up the rough magic. And that's a thought that I would like you to play with a little bit. What is he being freed of? I would suggest that magic is frequently, and at least in the Shakespearean sense, the magic of power is sometimes the illusion of control. We've seen that in a previous lecture when I talked about magic and power. And Prospero understands that, and he also understands that power exercises, or exacts rather, a certain cost on those who wield it. It's not much fun dealing with Caliban. It's not much fun actually having to tend to Ariel and to hold him in a certain kind of captivity, even though it's a very gentle captivity. There's a release. But Prospero only takes that release when he's done what he needed to do, when he's finally discharged the responsibilities that come with power. And so perhaps he's a model for us in a modest appreciation of power. With these lectures conclude. I want to say how much I've enjoyed giving them. I've learned a lot. I'm grateful to you for accompanying me on my own journey through Shakespeare. I find some of my views have changed. Perhaps we can discuss that later on. But in the meanwhile, I hope you've enjoyed these. I hope you've learned from them. And I hope your studies in rough magic, Shakespeare on power, will continue. I know mine will. Thank you very much.